Hi friends, Jeff the Rose Dude here, and in this video we're going to be going over the timing of hybridizing roses and growing them from seed. One of the most common questions I get here on YouTube and across all of my other social media platforms is it too early or is it too late for me to pollinate, to stratify my seeds, to plant my seeds? And I figured that I'd just make a video and then we can just kind of discuss the ideal times and also some of the scenarios that everybody goes through. So before we start that though, I do want to share with you a couple of my roses, my rose seedlings that ended up blooming here recently. And these were planted earlier this year. So these rose seedlings are only a couple months old and they're blooming. And that's what's really fun about growing roses from seed, is that you can be rewarded with flowers pretty soon. This video we are going to go over first the ideal time when to pollinate, when to collect your hips and your seeds, when to stratify them and when to plant them. And then we'll dive a little bit deeper in each category and kind of go through a little bit of scenarios, knowing if you can go ahead and try that step when it may not be ideal. But most importantly, make sure that you watch the end of this video, or if you don't want to watch everything in between, go to the very end at least. I'm going to give you a tip that will increase your chance of long-term success 1,000 times over. That's the best advice I can give you, and if you take that advice moving forward, you will be successful with pollinating your roses, with growing roses from seeds. So make sure that you take a look at that at the very end. But let's go ahead and get started on the ideal times to pollinate and grow your roses from seed. Your best chance of success of pollinating roses and growing them from seed is by imitating nature as close as possible. So try to time everything that it would naturally occur out in the wild. That's going to give you the best success rate by far. So when it comes to pollinating roses, usually flower pollination happens in the beginning of the growing season, usually within the first or the second flush of flowers. Now, there are a lot of roses that you may or may not know. There are roses that bloom only one time of year, and after they're done blooming, they don't bloom again until next year, right? So they do that early, usually earlier in the growing season. If you have some Gallica roses or species roses or albas, you will notice a lot of times they tend to be one of the very first flowers that bloom in your garden. And the reason why is because it takes about 3 to 4 months for rose hips to ripen, that has mature developed seeds that are viable. So if you are pollinating, then you want to try to pollinate your flowers usually within the first or maybe the second flush of the season. So in nature, it's usually around late spring into early summer is when the pollination starts. Now, like I said, it takes on average about 3 to 4 months for the seeds to fully develop, right? And we know when the hips are fully ripe because they usually turn a bright color, usually an orange or a red. And the reason why they do that in the wild is they change that color because they want to be appetizing to the wildlife, to the deer and to the birds. They want the wildlife to consume the rose hips that contain the seeds. And that is usually done anywhere from late summer and into the fall. Now, after that, the seeds will not grow until they feel like they have gone through a winter. And that process is called cold stratification. Rose seeds need to feel like they have gone through a full winter before they even think about starting to germinate and grow. And cold stratification in the wild, that's usually in the winter time, right? And then after winter is starting to finish up, it gets warmer in the spring, that's when your seeds will start growing. So usually, late winter into the spring is when we want to plant our seeds and go ahead and let them start growing and germinating and just watch them grow. So now we're going to talk about the timing of pollinating roses. So generally we want to do that earlier in the flowering season, right? When they first start flowering, usually within the first or the second flush of flowering. So there's not really a thing as pollinating them too early, right? Because all we care about is that we have at least 3 to 4 months for the rose hips to fully mature, containing the seeds, viable seeds. And so too early isn't really an issue. Now, too late, how you can determine if it's too late to pollinate is if you are within 3 to 4 months of freezing temperatures. When winter comes and your plants start going dormant, they will stop developing the seeds, right? So we want to make sure that we have at least 3 to 4 months of our flowers to be pollinated prior to freezing temperatures. And I wanted to show you this. These flowers I had just finished pollinating, and you can see that the rose hip right there, you can see is going to be, it's green and it's really hard. So it will take about 3 to 4 months for this to continue to grow, to swell. And when the seeds are fully developed and viable, then this green hip will turn, I think this one, it's a more of a bright orange color. So that's when I know that I can harvest the hip. Now, when it comes to the best time to harvest your rose hips and be able to collect the seeds that are inside, you do want to wait until the hips are fully ripened, right? And you can tell because they have changed a bright color. They tend to be a little bit soft and fleshy, not super squishy. But that's when you know that you can go ahead and harvest your hips. Now, sometimes, and just expect it to happen, sometimes you'll accidentally deadhead a flower that you didn't want to, and the hip will still be green. It's not ripe yet. There's a very good chance that the seeds aren't fully developed yet. Now, in other cases, if you wait a little bit too long, past when the hip has ripened, it can start getting very squishy and very soft. You still can collect the seeds out of it, but do be aware that when the hips are really soft and squishy like that, then you do run into the chance that the seeds have gotten moldy, and they could have started to rot to the point to where they are no longer viable and they won't grow. Now, another really common question that I get is, hey, Jeff, I found dried rose hips that were left on my rose throughout the winter. Am I able to get the seeds inside and still be able to grow them? The answer technically is you're going to have a very difficult time getting seeds to grow out of these rose hips. And there's a few different reasons I do want to tell you about. The first is that they, like I said earlier, they could have gotten squishy and moldy, and the seeds could have rotted prior to the hips drying out. So they may not even be viable. Another thing is that inside of rose hips are a ton of rose fibers, and those rose fibers not only are very our skin can be very sensitive to it, so if you are working with the inside of rose hips, make sure you wear plastic gloves, but those rose fibers also inhibit a proper cold stratification and also can inhibit seeds from even germinating and growing. So even though these rose hips and the seeds went through winter, there's a good chance they didn't feel like they have gone through a winter. And these rose seeds need to be cold stratified again, which takes about 3 months. We're going to go over that here in just a moment. And then the timing, we're pushed back 3 months further, right? And then also too is that the temperature outdoors, right? When these were outside in the winter, a lot of it depends on your own climate, right? But rose seeds enjoy a cold stratification or a winter where the temperatures are right around the temperature of our refrigerators. That's why refrigerators are most commonly used when cold stratifying rose seeds. Freezing temperatures can damage the seeds. So if you live in a climate where you get really, really cold and into freezing temperatures in the winter, there's a very good chance that your seeds could have been damaged. So when it comes to, is it too early or too late to collect my rose hips and my rose seeds? Ideally, you want to get your rose hips when they are fully ripened. But do be aware that if you collect your rose hips and your seeds too early, where the hips have not ripened yet, the seeds may not be developed enough. And then on the flip side, if you wait too long, your seeds may be already rotted, or they will have a hard time germinating, cold stratifying, and it can throw you so far behind to where they aren't even really worth it. Now we're on to the stage of planting your rose seeds. Now this, I do want you to know that it's super important that you figure out when the last frost date is of the year for you and what the first frost date of the year is for you. That is going to greatly help you determine whether planting your seeds or getting them ready to plant is going to be too early or too late. Here are some rose seeds. So if you don't know what they look like, this is what rose seeds do look like. I'm doing a little experiment on this, so make sure that you subscribe and see what I'm testing out with these, right? So rose seeds, before they even start wanting to grow, they have to go through cold stratification, which takes about 3 months. So too early, you will know if it's too early if 3 months from the day that you're thinking about cold stratifying your rose seeds, if it's still going to be too cold, if it's going to be freezing temperatures outdoors. When roses are out of cold stratification, the temperatures need to be warmer. If it's freezing temperatures, they will not germinate for you and they will not grow. So you may have to wait a little while before you go ahead and stratify your seeds. And you can go ahead and dry them and keep them stored until it is time for you to cold stratify your rose seeds. So maybe wait a little bit before you start the cold stratification process. Now, on the other end, if it's too late, generally after rose seeds and seedlings, once they start germinating and growing, they do need to be mature and large enough before freezing temperatures arrive. If the plants are very young or your temperatures get very, very cold, then they will have a very difficult time surviving their first winter as a plant, because out in the wild, they have an entire growing season to get large enough to be able to survive a winter, right? So if you start planting your seeds later in the growing season, they may not be large enough or mature enough to be able to survive a winter. Now, we can kind of play around with that a little bit depending on how we want to plant our seeds. So if it's too cold outside, right, and we start our seeds, we can start them indoors or in a greenhouse. A lot of people start their seeds, and I'm one of them, indoors or in a greenhouse, right? So in that way I can go ahead and plant them a little bit earlier than what I normally would need to if I was just using the outdoors to plant. And also, if I have a greenhouse, unheated greenhouse, or an unheated garage, or tucked, up against the house to where they're more protected in the winter, or even if I have a mild winter, then I can plant my seeds a a little bit later on during the year, and they should be fine. Now, as promised, it is getting towards the end of the video. Hopefully I helped you kind of manage, when a good time for you to do all these different processes, whether it's pollinating or collecting your seed or planting your seeds, stratifying them. Hopefully that helped you a little bit in determining if it's too early or too late for you. But the biggest suggestion, the biggest tip that I can give you is to experiment and find the answer for yourself. And I know it sounds really simple, but it's really scary to do, right? But if you don't know if it's too early to plant or too late to plant, go ahead and plant. You can always get more seeds. I have rose seeds available online, usually in the fall and into the winter time, available for sale for you to get. But you can, use your rose seeds that you get from your roses. You get them every year. They're going to be available for you every year, right? And usually when we are interested in wanting to try to grow roses from seed or hybridizing them, usually our interest is not aligned with the ideal time, right? So, take your first year, whenever it is, and use that to your advantage and see for yourself, right? If you don't know if it's too late to pollinate, say it's in the fall time and you're like, oh, I don't know if it's too late to pollinate. It probably is if you're within that 3 to 4 months, but I always suggest still pollinate your roses, right? The worst case scenario is that, you're going to pollinate your roses and they're not going to be able to turn into fully developed seeds. But you gained the experience and the confidence of pollinating, right? So then that way next year, when you are in the ideal time, you're going to be a lot more comfortable in pollinating your roses because you've done it before, right? If you find a rose hip that is, not ripe enough, right? Or you got seeds from an unripe rose hip, still, I suggest go ahead and get the seeds out, get them stratified, plant them. You may get something that germinates. More than likely you will not, but again, you're going to gain the experience. You're going to have already gotten seeds out of a rose hip, of cold stratifying and of planting them, right? If you have rose seeds and it's in the middle of summer and you're like, ooh, I think it's a little bit too late for me to plant them. If you know that you're going to be getting access to rose seeds again in the fall or in the winter time, take the seeds and get them cold stratified, get them planted, and you will be able to watch your seeds germinate and grow. And then what you can do is that you can use that as another experiment. Like, put a couple of your roses, leave them outdoors. Put a couple up against the house. Put a couple in the shed and see if there's any of those roses that do better in the different areas to survive the winter. Find out for yourself. I don't live in your climate. Other people that have done this may not live in your climate as well. So always, figure out what works for you, but you always learn the best if you learn what doesn't work, right? So kind of use, your first year when times aren't ideal and just go through the process. So that way you can be a lot more confident and comfortable because it's all about having fun with roses, with pollinating them, with growing them from seed. It is so much fun, and we all start off somewhere, and it can be a very scary and it can be a very intimidating topic, especially if you're initially just starting to get into this. So use, the off times to get started by, just experiment, get some experience, under your belt. And you're going to be a lot more confident in the next time that you do it during the ideal time. And remember, this is supposed to be fun, and it is so much fun, and it is a lot easier. Don't be afraid of failing, right? I don't believe in the word fail. Rather, it's one step closer to being successful, right? So gain the confidence in yourself. You can absolutely do it. If I can do it, believe me, anyone can do it. So don't be dissuaded, if something doesn't work out for you. Use this time to experiment and, get some of this, get the pollinating, do it, and that way when it turns out, you're going to be a lot more successful. Next year and the following year and the following year, because you will want to do this from year to year. I promise you will. It is that much fun. But anyway, I hope that this video helped you out and answer your question. I get this question all the time, almost on a daily basis. So hopefully this answered that for you. If you do have any other questions, feel free to leave a comment down below. Ask me a question. And I'd be more than happy to walk with you, with your special circumstances that you may be going through that this video did not answer. And then also, as before, I do have rose seeds available for sale online, usually late fall and into the winter time, and I'll make sure to post my website in the description below, so that way you can go on there, you can sign up, and you will get notified when rose seeds are available for you. So anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and remember to have fun with your roses.